Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you loved and realized that every smile, every soft word, and every promise they ever gave you was nothing but a calculated lie? It is a terrifying realization. It doesn't hit you like a sudden thunderstorm. Instead, it creeps in like cold water rising around your ankles until you are drowning in your own trust. My name is Clara, and for 5 years, I believed I was living a life most people only dreamed of. I had a beautiful home, a successful career as a graphic designer, and most importantly, I had a husband who seemed to adore the ground I walked on. His name was Julian. To the outside world, Julian was a charming, hard-working man who treated me like gold. When we first met, I was a struggling freelancer, working late nights out of a cramped one-bedroom apartment, living on cheap coffee and hope. Julian came into my life like a savior. He was confident, educated, and always knew exactly what to say to make me feel safe. "You have so much talent, Clara," he used to tell me, running his fingers through my hair as I stared at my glowing computer screen late at night. "You shouldn't be wasting your time chasing small clients who don't appreciate you. We should start a company together. You handle the creative side, the heart and soul of the business, and I will handle the boring paperwork, the finances, and the clients." At the time, it sounded like a dream come true. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. He was the person who held me when my mother passed away, the person who promised to protect me from the world. So we started Apex Design Studio. For the first 2 years, it was hard work, but we were a team. Or at least I thought we were a team. I spent 16 hours a day creating branding strategies, designing websites, and building a reputation from scratch. Meanwhile, Julian handled the bank accounts, the legal contracts, and the meetings. He looked the part of a successful CEO, wearing tailored suits bought with the money my designs brought in. I didn't care about the spotlight. I was happy to let him be the face of the company while I remained behind the scenes, creating the magic. But success changes people. Or perhaps, success simply unmasks who they truly are. By the 4th year, Apex Design Studio was a massive success. We had major corporate clients, a beautiful office downtown, and a team of junior designers. But as the business grew, Julian started to change. The gentle man who used to bring me coffee while I worked turned cold and distant. He began staying out late, claiming he was networking with high-profile clients. Whenever I asked to look over the company's quarterly financial reports, he would laugh it off, waving his hand dismissively. "Don't worry your beautiful head about the numbers, Clara," he would say, his voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that began to make my stomach turn. "You're an artist. You don't understand taxes and corporate structures. Just focus on making things look pretty, and let me handle the rest." I felt a small prick of unease, but I brushed it away. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself that marriage has its dry spells and that the stress of running a multi-million-dollar business was just getting to him. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a chilly Tuesday in November. Julian had left early for a breakfast meeting with a major investor. He had left his personal laptop open on the kitchen island, something he never, ever did. Usually, his devices were locked behind passwords I wasn't allowed to know. But that morning, he had been in a rush. I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a cup of tea, and my eyes drifted to the screen. It was an open email thread with a law firm. I didn't mean to spy, but my own name caught my eye in the subject line. The title of the email read, "Asset Transfer and Restructuring, Clara Vance." With a frowning brow and a racing heart, I walked over to the laptop. I clicked on the email. As I read the words on that screen, the room began to spin. The walls felt like they were crashing down on me, trapping me in a nightmare from which I could not wake up. The email was from a prominent corporate lawyer, and it was addressed directly to Julian. As my eyes scanned the paragraphs, the cold reality of what I was reading began to freeze the blood in my veins. Julian hadn't just been managing our business. Over the past 18 months, he had been systematically rewriting the legal framework of Apex Design Studio. Through a series of forged signatures, hidden clauses, and shell companies, he had slowly removed my name from every single asset we owned. The company that I had built with my bare hands, the brand that existed solely because of my creative vision, was no longer mine. It belonged entirely to a new holding company, and Julian was the sole owner. But it didn't stop there. I scrolled down further, my hands trembling so violently that I almost knocked my tea over. There was an attached document titled Post-Divorce Strategy. Julian was planning to leave me, but he wasn't just planning a standard separation. He was planning to wipe me out. The documents detailed a plan to lock me out of the company offices, revoke my access to all corporate accounts, and present me with a divorce settlement that would leave me with nothing but a mountain of personal debt that he had quietly shifted into my name. According to the timeline in the email, he was planning to serve me the papers in exactly 3 weeks, right after the signing of our biggest contract yet, a 5-year partnership with a global tech giant called Nexus Industries. The Nexus contract would secure the company's financial future for the next decade, making it worth millions, and Julian wanted to make sure I didn't see a single dime of it. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock sounding like a bomb counting down. My chest felt so tight I could barely breathe. The man I loved, the man I slept next to every night, had been sitting across from me at the dinner table, smiling, while secretly plotting to destroy my entire life. Suddenly, I heard the garage door opening. Julian was back. Panic seized me. I quickly closed the email window, wiped down the mouse with my sleeve to ensure everything looked exactly as he left it, and stepped back to the stove just as the kitchen door swung open. Julian walked in, looking incredibly handsome in his charcoal suit. He smiled his brilliant, practiced smile, walking over to plant a soft kiss on my cheek. It took every ounce of physical and mental strength I possessed not to flinch away from his touch. To me, his lips felt like ice. "Morning, sweetheart," he said cheerfully, grabbing his laptop and closing the lid. "Forgot my computer. I have a huge meeting with the Nexus executives in an hour. Wish me luck." "Good luck," I whispered. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else, someone far away. "Are you okay?" he asked, pausing for a brief second, his sharp eyes narrowing as he looked at my face. "You look a bit pale." "I'm just a little tired," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Didn't sleep well last night." "Go rest then," he said smoothly, patting my shoulder before turning on his heel. "I'll be home late tonight. Don't wait up." As the front door clicked shut and his car pulled out of the driveway, I collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The tears finally came, hot and blinding. I cried for the 5 years I had wasted. I cried for the love I thought we had. I cried because I felt completely, utterly defeated. I had no money in my personal accounts, no legal claim to my own company, and no one to turn to. Julian had spent years isolating me from my friends, telling me they were jealous of our success, until I had no one left. I lay on that cold tile floor for what felt like hours. But as the tears dried, a new feeling began to stir deep inside my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a cold, sharp, burning anger. Julian thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought I was just a naive artist who could be easily discarded when I was no longer useful. He thought I was weak. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face, and looked at my reflection in the microwave door. My eyes were red, but the sadness was gone. In its place was something Julian had never seen in me before. A fierce determination. He wanted a war. He thought he had already won it before I even knew it started. But he had made one fatal mistake. He forgot that without me, there was no Apex design studio. He forgot that he was just the rapper. I was the product. They thought I was defeated. But that was the exact moment my real plan began. If you want to take down someone who thinks they are untouchable, you cannot hit them right away. If I confronted Julian now, he would simply use his expensive lawyers to accelerate the timeline, lock me out immediately, and ruin me before I could gather my strength. No, I had to play the part he expected me to play. I had to be the clueless, submissive, trusting wife just a little while longer. The first thing I needed was information, and for that I needed professional help. I knew I couldn't go to just any lawyer. Julian's legal team was massive and well-funded. I needed someone who specialized in corporate fraud, someone who operated in the shadows. After days of quiet research using a burner phone I bought with cash, I found a woman named Evelyn Vance. No relation to me, but her reputation was legendary. She was a forensic accountant and an attorney who specialized in uncovering hidden assets during messy corporate divorces. I met Evelyn in a tiny, dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, far away from anyone who might recognize me. I laid out everything I had discovered from Julian's laptop. Evelyn listened in silence, reviewing the notes I had frantically written down from memory. Her expression didn't change, but when she finished, she looked up at me with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Your husband is thorough, Clara," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Legally, he has tied this up very neatly. On paper, you signed away your rights to the intellectual property of Apex Design Studio 18 months ago during a routine corporate restructuring. But I never signed anything like that," I protested, my voice rising in panic. "He must have slipped those papers into a stack of creative approvals, or he outright forged my signature." "I believe you," Evelyn said, placing a reassuring hand over mine. "But proving forgery in court takes months, sometimes years. By the time we prove it, he will have signed the Nexus contract, emptied the company accounts, and disappeared behind a wall of offshore corporations. You will be left penniless, fighting a legal battle you can't afford to finish." My heart sank. "So there's nothing I can do? He just wins?" Evelyn smiled, a slow, calculated smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "I didn't say that. I said you can't beat him in a standard legal battle right now. But corporate law is a game of leverage. Julian's entire plan relies on one thing: the Nexus Industries contract. Nexus is a massive, conservative corporation. They are investing millions into Apex because of your brand's pristine reputation and creative genius. If they find out that the company is built on fraud, or if the creative mind behind the company walks away, that contract vanishes. And if the contract vanishes, Julian's shell companies become worthless pieces of paper." I looked at her, the wheels in my mind beginning to turn. "You mean I need to take away his prize?" "Exactly," Evelyn nodded. "But you have to do it at the exact moment it hurts the most. Right at the finish line. To do that, we need proof of his financial manipulation. I need you to get me access to the company's internal server. Specifically the secure backup files that Julian keeps on his private network at the office. Can you do that?" "He changes the passwords every week," I said, thinking deeply. "And he never lets me near his office anymore." "Then you'll have to find a way," Evelyn said softly. "But remember, Clara, from this moment on, you are an actress. You cannot let him see a single hint of suspicion. If he suspects, the trap closes, and you lose everything." That night I went home. Julian was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of scotch watching a football game. He looked relaxed, confident, the picture of a man who had the world on a string. "Hey, beautiful," he called out as I walked in. "Where have you been? I called you a couple of times." My phone had been turned off while I was with Evelyn. I forced my voice to sound light and apologetic. "Oh, sorry, honey. My battery died. I was at the art supply store and then I took a long walk to clear my head. Designing the final concepts for the Nexus project has been wiping me out." Julian's eyes lit up at the mention of Nexus. He stood up and walked over to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "That's my girl. How are the designs coming along?" "They need to be absolutely perfect for the final presentation in 2 weeks. This is the big one, Clara. This is the project that changes our lives forever." "Your life, not ours," I thought bitterly. But out loud, I smiled up at him, leaning into his chest. "They're going to be breathtaking, Julian. I'm putting everything I have into this. It'll be a masterpiece." "That's what I like to hear," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. As I stood there wrapped in the arms of my betrayer, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The fear was entirely gone. The woman who used to need his validation was dead. Julian thought he was using me to build his empire, but he had no idea that I was about to use his own greed to tear it down, brick by brick. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. Every single day, I woke up, cooked breakfast for the man who was actively trying to destroy me, and wished him a wonderful day at the office. I spent my days at the Apex studio, working alongside our junior designers, creating the branding materials for Nexus Industries. I poured my soul into that project. Not for Julian, but because I knew that the better the work was, the more reliant Julian would become on it. He needed my designs to secure his fortune. I made sure they were flawless, stunning, and completely tied to my specific style of digital artistry. A style that no one else in the company could replicate. But while my days were spent designing, my nights were spent planning. I needed that server access for Evelyn. I knew that Julian kept an encrypted external hard drive in the safe inside his private office at the studio. The office was protected by a digital keypad, and the safe inside required a physical key that he kept on his keychain at all times. To get the code for the keypad, I had to be clever. One afternoon, I walked into his office while he was out at lunch, carrying a tray of fresh coffee and pastries for the administrative staff. I pretended to notice a smudge on his office window and offered to clean it. While inside, I discreetly sprayed a special, clear ultraviolet powder which I had ordered online, onto the digital keypad. Later that evening, after everyone had left the office except Julian and me, I waited until he went to the restroom. I quickly walked up to his door, pulled a small UV flashlight from my pocket, and shone it on the keypad. The numbers 2, 4, 7, and 9 were glowing faintly where his fingertips had transferred the powder. It didn't give me the exact sequence, but it narrowed down the possibilities significantly. The next day, I volunteered to stay late to finish up the rendering for the Nexus pitch. Julian was thrilled. "That's my hard-working wife," he said, kissing my cheek as he grabbed his coat. "I have a late dinner with a few investors tonight, so don't wait up for me." I knew what those investors' meetings really were now. Evelyn had uncovered that Julian had been spending time at a luxury penthouse downtown, registered under a fake corporate name. He wasn't just planning to steal my money. He was already sharing it with someone else, a younger woman he had hired as a consultant a few months prior. The betrayal ran deeper than I ever could have imagined, but I didn't let it break me. I used the pain as fuel. Once the office was completely empty and the security guard downstairs was on his regular rounds, I walked up to Julian's office door. My heart was pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. I entered the numbers based on the glow marks. 2479. Incorrect. I tried another variation. 9742. Incorrect. The machine beeped quietly, warning me that I had one attempt left before a security alert was sent to Julian's phone. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I closed my eyes and thought about Julian. He was arrogant. He thought he was a genius. What numbers would he choose? I remembered his favorite quote from a business book he loved, something about the 74-29 rule of corporate negotiation. With trembling fingers, I pressed 7429. Click. The lock turned, and the door swung open. I slipped inside, closing the door softly behind me. The office was dark, illuminated only by the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Now came the hard part, the safe. It was hidden behind a painting of a cityscape. I swung the painting open, revealing the heavy steel electronic safe. It didn't just need a combination. It needed that physical key Julian kept on his keychain. But I had prepared for this. 2 nights ago, while Julian was fast asleep after drinking a bit too much scotch, I had quietly taken his keys from the nightstand, pressed his office key into a block of soft jeweler's wax to create a perfect mold, and put the keys back before he ever woke up. The next day, I had a specialist create a duplicate from the mold. I pulled the duplicate key from my pocket. I entered his birth date into the safe's digital keypad, a guess that luckily paid off, and inserted the key. With a soft, heavy mechanical thud, the safe opened. Inside lay stacks of cash, corporate documents, and there, sitting right in the center, was the black encrypted external hard drive. This drive contained the true financial ledger of Apex Design Studio, the real numbers, the forged contracts, and the paper trail of the shell companies Julian had created to wipe me out. I pulled a high-speed data cloner out of my bag, a device Evelyn had provided me. I plugged the drive into the cloner. The progress bar began to tick up. 10%. 30%. 50%. Suddenly, I heard a sound from the hallway outside. It was the sound of heavy footsteps walking toward the office suite. My heart stopped. The security guard wasn't supposed to be on this floor for another 30 minutes. The footsteps were getting closer, the rhythmic thud of leather shoes echoing in the quiet night. If I unplugged the drive now, the data would be corrupted, and I would lose my only chance. If I stayed, I would be caught red-handed in Julian's office, and my entire plan would explode before it even began. The footsteps were right outside the main glass doors of the design studio. The cloner screen flashed 75%, 80%. I looked around the dark office, panic clawing at my throat. If the guard turned the corner and saw the glowing screen of the safe, I was finished. I quickly grabbed a dark wool jacket that Julian kept hanging on a coat rack and draped it over the safe, blocking out the light from the cloning device. Then, I stepped out from behind the desk and walked toward the office door, opening it just as the security guard stepped into the main lobby. It was Arthur, an older man who had worked in the building for years. He started when he saw me, his flashlight beam dropping to the floor. "Oh, Mrs. Vance. You scared me?" Arthur said, holding a hand over his heart. "I didn't think anyone was still up here. The lights were mostly off." I forced a warm, tired smile, leaning against the doorframe of Julian's office to block his view of the interior.
Arthur.
"Sorry about that. I was just grabbing a file from Julian's desk for the Nexus presentation tomorrow. I'm working late in the creative suite down the hall." Arthur nodded understandingly. "Ah, the big project. Mr. Vance mentioned it. You folks are working hard. Just make sure you lock up when you leave, ma'am." "I will, Arthur. Thank you for keeping us safe," I said gracefully. He smiled, turned around, and continued his walk down the corridor. I waited until the sound of his footsteps faded completely before dashing back into Julian's office. The cloner screen was solid green, 100% complete. I quickly disconnected the device, put the encrypted hard drive back in the exact position I found it, locked the safe, and spun the painting back into place. I wiped down the desk, stepped out of the office, locked the keypad door, and walked back to my own desk, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. The next morning, I delivered the clone data to Evelyn. Within 24 hours, her team had dissected the files. What they found was even worse than we expected. Julian hadn't just stolen the company from me. He had also been embezzling funds from our current clients, hiding the losses in an account associated with my name. If the company went under, or if the fraud was discovered by the authorities, I would be the one taking the fall while he walked away clean with the Nexus millions. "He didn't just want to leave you, Clara," Evelyn said, her voice dark as she looked at the financial maps on her screen. "He wanted to destroy you completely so you could never come after him legally. If this went through, you would be facing criminal charges for corporate fraud while he lived like a king abroad." A cold numbness washed over me. The last lingering shred of grief I had for my marriage evaporated into nothingness. Julian wasn't just a cheat, he was a monster. "Can we stop him?" I asked, my voice steady and cold as steel. "Oh, we can do much more than stop him," Evelyn said, looking up at me with a dangerous spark in her eyes. "With this data, we have everything we need to prove corporate theft, forgery, and embezzlement. But if we go to the police now, he will hire top-tier defense lawyers, post bail, and tie this up in court for years. We need to let him walk into his own trap. We let him think he has won. We let him get to the very peak of his success. And then we pull the rug out from under him." "The Nexus signing," I realized. "Exactly," Evelyn nodded. "The signing ceremony is next week at the luxury hotel downtown. The Nexus executives, the press, and the entire local business community will be there. Julian has arranged for a massive public celebration. He wants the world to see him as a visionary leader." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Keep designing," Evelyn said. "And when the time comes, I will provide you with a very specific flash drive to use during the final presentation. Julian wants a show. We are going to give him one he will never forget." When I returned to the studio that afternoon, Julian was in a fantastic mood. He came into my workspace, beaming, and dropped a thick stack of papers on my desk. "Great news, Clara," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "The Nexus legal team approved everything. The signing ceremony is set for next Thursday at the Grand Regent Hotel. It's going to be huge. And look, I have the final corporate restructuring documents here. I just need you to sign these last few pages of creative releases so we can finalize the presentation materials." I looked down at the documents. I knew exactly what they were. These were the final papers that would officially transfer the remaining intellectual property of my designs into his holding company, completely stripping me of any legal connection to Apex Design Studio. Julian handed me a sleek silver pen, his eyes gleaming with an eager, greedy light. He thought he was about to secure his final victory. He thought he was looking at a victim. I looked up at him, smiling warmly into his deceitful face. "Of course, honey," I said softly. "Let me just look over them tonight, and I'll sign them first thing in the morning." Julian's smile tightened slightly, a flash of impatience crossing his eyes, but he quickly covered it up. "Sure, sweetheart. Just don't forget. We need everything locked in by tomorrow noon." "I won't forget," I promised. That night, instead of signing the documents, I handed them to Evelyn, who prepared our countermeasure. The trap was set. Julian had built the gallows, but he had no idea his own neck was already in the noose. The night before the Nexus signing ceremony was strangely peaceful. The storm was coming, but the air was perfectly still. Julian had gone out to a pre-celebration dinner with his consultant girlfriend, leaving me alone in the house we had shared for 5 years. I walked through the quiet rooms, looking at the photographs on the walls. Pictures of us laughing on a beach in Italy, photos from our wedding day, images of a life that was entirely built on a foundation of sand. I didn't feel sadness anymore. I didn't feel regret. I felt a profound sense of relief. Tomorrow the mask would come off. Tomorrow the truth would be told. Evelyn called me late that evening. "Are you ready, Clara?" she asked quietly. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied. "The Nexus executives have arrived in the city," Evelyn explained. "I've privately reached out to their chief legal counsel, a man named Mr. Henderson. I didn't show him everything, but I showed him enough of the real financial ledger to make him very, very curious. He agreed to attend the presentation tomorrow, but he brought his own security and legal team. Julian thinks he's walking into a standard contract signing, but he's walking into a tribunal." "And the media?" I asked. "Julian invited them himself, remember?" Evelyn chuckled softly. "He wanted the local business journals to cover his big moment. He wanted the press coverage to boost his personal brand. I just made sure a few investigative journalists received an anonymous tip that something highly explosive was going to happen at that press conference. They will all be there with cameras rolling." "Thank you, Evelyn," I said from the bottom of my heart. "Don't thank me yet, Clara. Tomorrow requires absolute perfection from you. You will be presenting the creative direction to the Nexus board before the contract is signed. That is when you swap the presentation files. You have to remain calm under pressure. Can you do that?" "Julian taught me how to lie for 5 years," I said, a cold edge to my voice. "I learned from the best. I can handle it." After hanging up, I went to the bedroom and picked out my outfit for the next day. I chose a sharp, tailored ivory suit. It was clean, powerful, and pristine. It was the outfit of a woman who was not afraid of the light. When Julian finally came home around 2 a.m., he smelled of expensive champagne and perfume that wasn't mine. He stumbled into the bedroom, seeing me sitting up in bed, reading a book. "Clara, still awake?" He slurred slightly, a wide, arrogant smile on his face. "Tomorrow is the day, baby. The day everything changes. We're going to be rich beyond our wildest dreams." "Yes, Julian," I said, looking at him with a calm, steady gaze that should have terrified him if he had been sober enough to notice. "Tomorrow everything changes. Everything comes to light." "That's right," he chuckled, throwing his jacket onto a chair. "To light." He collapsed onto the bed and was asleep within minutes, snoring loudly. I lay awake beside him for the last time, watching the shadows of the tree branches move across the ceiling like skeletal fingers. For months, Julian had looked at me and seen a checkbox, a tool, a stepping stone to his own greatness. He truly believed that because I was quiet, because I was kind, I was weak. He mistook my patience for blindness. He mistook my love for stupidity. But tomorrow he would learn a very painful lesson. He would learn that the most dangerous person in the room is not the one who shouts, or the one who boasts, or the one who holds the power. The most dangerous person in the room is the one who silently sits back, watches your every move, and lets you destroy yourself with your own arrogance. I closed my eyes and smiled. The clock was ticking, and morning was finally coming. The ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel was magnificent. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a bright glow over the hundreds of guests who had gathered for the event. Banners featuring the logos of Apex Design Studio and Nexus Industries hung proudly from the walls. Julian was in his absolute element. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by local politicians, reporters, and wealthy business owners, holding a glass of champagne, laughing loudly. He looked like the king of the world. I stood near the tech booth at the back of the room, wearing my ivory suit, watching him. In my pocket, my fingers curled around the small silver flash drive Evelyn had given me. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice echoed through the powerful sound system. Please take your seats. We are about to begin the final presentation and official contract signing between Nexus Industries and Apex Design Studio. The crowd quieted down and moved toward the rows of elegant chairs. At the front of the room stood a massive projector screen and a beautifully polished mahogany stage. Sitting at the front row were the top executives from Nexus Industries, including their CEO, a stern-faced woman named Victoria Sterling, and their chief legal counsel, Mr. Henderson. Julian walked up to the stage, taking the microphone with a smooth, practiced ease. "Thank you all for coming," Julian began, his voice warm and commanding. 5 years ago, Apex Design Studio was just a dream. Today, it stands as a beacon of innovation and creative excellence. This partnership with Nexus Industries represents the culmination of all our hard work. But before we sign the official contracts, I want to invite the true creative genius behind our brand, my beautiful wife, Clara Vance, to present the vision that will define this partnership. The crowd erupted into applause. Julian looked back at me, smiling warmly, extending his hand to invite me onto the stage. It was a beautiful public display of affection, meant to show the world what a loving, supportive partner he was. I walked down the aisle, the clicking of my heels sounding incredibly clear in my own ears. I ascended the stairs and took the stage. Julian stepped close, whispering in my ear as he handed me the presentation clicker. "Make it perfect, Clara. Secure the bag." I looked at him, smiled, and said softly, "It will be unforgettable, Julian." He walked off the stage and took his seat in the front row, right next to Victoria Sterling. I plugged my flash drive into the podium's laptop. On the massive screen behind me, the title slide appeared, Apex and Nexus, a new vision for the future. "Good afternoon, everyone." I began, my voice clear and steady, echoing through the ballroom. For the past 5 years, I have poured my heart and soul into building the creative identity of Apex Design Studio. Every design, every concept, and every brand strategy was born out of a deep belief in truth, integrity, and artistic expression. Today, as we stand on the verge of this massive partnership, I believe it is vital that we look at the true foundation of this company. I clicked the remote. Instead of the next slide showing the corporate logos and design mock-ups, the screen went completely black for 3 seconds. Then, a massive document appeared on the screen. It was the asset transfer and restructuring plan that I had found on Julian's laptop. My name was explicitly crossed out, replaced by a series of shell corporations owned entirely by Julian. The crowd went completely silent. A confused murmur began to ripple through the audience. Julian frowned in the front row, his smile faltering. He leaned forward, gesturing to me wildly with his hands, mouthing the words, "Wrong file. Change the slide." But I didn't change the slide. I clicked the remote again. The next slide displayed a high-definition recording of Julian's private financial ledgers, side by side with the forged signature documents Evelyn's team had verified. Above the documents, in large, bold black letters, read the headline, "The Real Apex. A Case Study in Corporate Fraud and Betrayal." The murmurs in the ballroom instantly turned into a loud roar of shock. Reporters immediately lifted their cameras, flashes going off like a wave of lightning strikes. Julian scrambled out of his seat, his face turning a deep, angry shade of crimson. He rushed toward the stage, shouting at the tech team at the back of the room. "Shut it down. Turn off the projector. This is a technical glitch. Turn it off right now," he screamed, his polished, charming voice cracking with sheer panic. But the tech team didn't turn it off. Evelyn was standing right behind them, accompanied by 2 private security guards who blocked anyone from touching the control console. I stood at the podium, completely calm, looking down at Julian as he reached the bottom of the stage stairs. "This is not a glitch, Julian." My voice boomed through the microphone, cutting through the chaos of the room. "This is the truth. For the past 18 months, you have been systematically forging my signature, embezzling money from our clients, and setting up shell companies to strip me of everything I built, all while planning to frame me for your financial crimes." Julian tried to step onto the stage, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and terror. "Clara, you are insane. You've completely lost your mind. You're ruining everything." "No, Julian," I said calmly, looking directly into his eyes. "I am just showing our investors the true foundation of your business." At that moment, Victoria Sterling, the CEO of Nexus Industries, stood up. Her face was like stone. She looked at Julian, then looked up at the massive screen displaying the clear evidence of embezzlement and fraud. She turned to her chief legal counsel, Mr. Henderson, who simply nodded his head, confirming that the data matched the preliminary files Evelyn had shared with him the day before. "Mr. Vance," Victoria Sterling's voice was cold and sharp as glass, cutting through the noise of the ballroom. "Nexus Industries does not do business with criminals. The partnership is officially cancelled."
No.
"Victoria, please look at me," Julian pleaded, turning around, his hands extended in desperation. "This is a setup. My wife is unstable. She made all of this up to hurt me because we are having marital issues. It's all a lie." "Is this a lie too, Julian?" I asked, clicking the remote one final time. The screen changed to show a live financial tracker of the company's main operational accounts. In real time, the funds that Julian had secretly funneled into his offshore shell companies were being legally frozen by a court order that Evelyn had secured just 30 minutes prior, using the cloned evidence of his fraud. Julian watched the screen as the multi-million-dollar balances on his hidden accounts flashed red, turning to zero as they were locked by federal authorities pending a full criminal investigation. His knees visibly buckled. He stumbled backward against the front row of chairs, his glass of champagne falling from his hand and shattering on the polished marble floor. The brilliant, untouchable Julian Vance was completely undone, exposed in front of the entire city, the media, and the partners he had tried to exploit. He looked around the room, desperately searching for a friendly face, someone to help him, someone to defend him. But there was no one. His investors turned away from him in disgust. The reporters were aggressively crowding around him, cameras flashing, throwing questions at him like rapid fire. He looked up at me on the stage. The realization finally hit him. I wasn't the naive, clueless artist he thought he could discard. I was the architect of his total destruction. They thought I was defeated, but I had just completely dismantled his entire life, right at the peak of his arrogance. The aftermath of that afternoon was swift and absolute. As Julian tried to flee the ballroom through a side exit to avoid the flashing cameras of the media, he was met in the lobby by 4 plainclothes police officers. Thanks to the comprehensive file of financial evidence, forged documents, and embezzlement records that Evelyn had delivered to the district attorney's office that morning, a warrant for his arrest had already been signed. I watched from the top of the Grand Hotel staircase as the officers intercepted him. Julian tried to argue, his voice rising in angry protest, but the handcuffs were slapped onto his wrists with a heavy, final click. The man who had worn custom-tailored suits bought with my hard work was led out of the luxury hotel in restraints. His head bowed to avoid the cameras of the very journalists he had invited to witness his glory. The legal battle that followed was intense, but because our evidence was so airtight, Julian had no ground to stand on. His expensive defense lawyers quickly realized that a trial would only result in a maximum sentence, so they begged for a plea deal. In the end, Julian pleaded guilty to multiple counts of corporate fraud, grand theft, and forgery. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. Furthermore, the court ordered the immediate dissolution of his shell companies, and every single asset, every piece of intellectual property, and every dollar that had been wrongfully taken was legally returned to me. Apex Design Studio was mine again, completely, entirely mine. A few weeks after the sentencing, I walked into the empty office suite of Apex late in the evening. The junior designers had gone home, and the space was quiet. I walked into Julian's old office. The digital keypad was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant glass door. The cityscape painting was gone, exposing the blank wall where his safe used to be hidden. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city lights. For a long time, I wondered how I could have been so blind. How could I have loved someone who was capable of such deep, calculated cruelty? But as I stood there in the quiet night, I realized that my capacity to trust wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Julian's tragedy was that he believed the only way to succeed in this world was through deception, manipulation, and stepping on the people who cared for him. He thought that greed made him strong. But greed is a fragile thing. It requires constant lies to maintain, and eventually, the weight of those lies will cause the entire structure to collapse. I had lost 5 years of my life to a ghost, to a man who never truly existed. But I didn't look back with bitterness anymore. The experience had forged me into someone new. I was no longer just the artist hiding in the shadows, afraid of the business world. I was a leader, a survivor, a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and was no longer afraid to claim it. 2 months later, Apex Design Studio held its official relaunch. We didn't do it in a flashy ballroom with expensive champagne and local politicians. We did it right in our creative studio, surrounded by our hardworking team, our honest clients, and the people who truly supported us. Surprisingly, Victoria Sterling from Nexus Industries attended. She walked up to me, a rare, genuine smile on her face, and extended her hand. "You are a remarkably resilient woman, Clara," Victoria said, her sharp eyes full of genuine respect. When we saw that evidence on the screen, my board was furious. But we also recognized the sheer brilliance of the woman who uncovered it. We know that the true value of Apex never belonged to Julian. It belongs to you. If you are still interested, Nexus would like to discuss a new partnership. This time on your terms. I looked at her, then looked back at my team of designers who were laughing and celebrating across the room. "Thank you, Victoria," I said, shaking her hand firmly. "I would love to, but this time everything will be transparent. Every contract, every number, and every plan will be out in the open." "That is exactly why we want to work with you," she nodded. The contract was drafted, reviewed by Evelyn, and signed the following week. It was a massive success, securing the studio's future and allowing us to expand our team and take on projects that truly made a difference in the community. As our story comes to an end, I want you to reflect on your own life. There are going to be times when people you love, people you trust, or people you work with will try to take advantage of your kindness. They will look at your patience and think it is weakness. They will plot against you in the dark, believing that because you are a good person, you will never fight back. They might even succeed in taking away your hard work, your position, or your peace of mind for a short time. When that happens, you will feel broken. You will feel defeated. You will feel like curling up on the floor and letting the darkness take over. But remember my story. Defeat is not the end unless you choose to stay down. The people who betray you are always blinded by their own arrogance. They are so busy celebrating their cleverness that they never look down to see the trap they are digging for themselves. Be patient. Gather your strength. Stay calm. Keep your eyes open, and let the truth be your weapon. Because in the end, justice is not just about getting revenge. True justice is about reclaiming your power, standing tall in the light of truth, and watching the empires built on lies crumble into dust. They thought I was defeated, but that was just the day I finally discovered who I was truly meant to be.